Well, Mike, get up here. Don't let me be all by myself. All right, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome out. Good morning. Glad to see you. Maybe we'll get some people trickling in that slept in from being down here in St. George. So anyway, it's nice to be with you guys this morning. My name's Jake Hadfield. I work with USU Extension. I'm the ag faculty up in Cache County. And this is my colleague, Mike Pace. I'll introduce him, I guess. He's my counterpart in Box Elder County. So we're from up in the North Counties. We drove down here, and we're excited to present some research that we did this last year across Utah on interseeding cover crops and standing corn. And so just to give a little bit of a background, kind of what we're looking at. So originally in Cache County, we had a conservation district there. It's our North Cache Conservation District. They were really interested, and they actually got an interseeder. They were getting started, and they really liked what they were seeing when they were interseeding these cover crops and corn. And they really liked, they were seeing a lot of success in a lot of ways. They had to go through some trials. It's kind of hard to get started and whatnot. But they really, once they got going, they were really happy. And so they kind of approached us with USU Extension because what they wanted to see is they kind of wanted to see some numbers. They wanted to see what the numbers looked like and to have us come in and kind of look at, yields, different things like that, measure the numbers so we can see what is happening, as well as look at some soil health parameters, see if those are altering or changing or just improving overall. And so that's really where we got started with this project and kind of got started into looking at interseeding into corn. So
if you look at, go do some literature research on interseeding in corn, you're going to find that most of the information has been done back in the eastern states. And Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, those guys have done quite a bit of work. You look at some of the different machines that they've got. This one on the right kind of shows one of the high interseeders that they've got where you're putting it in corn. It's anywhere from 2-3 leaf stage on up to something that's 2.5 feet tall. Some of those guys are looking, saying, okay, can we go in and modify some of our grain drills and pull out just some of our disc openers and still run that down through the corn rows, and you're putting anywhere from 2 to 3 lines of seed in between your corn rows with that. And so that's where a lot of that research is done with that. And this is just kind of a map showing you where that's research is done. And so the whole idea was that, it's all done back in those eastern states. If you do a quick Google search and try and find information here in the West, you find nothing. And so that's where we decided, hey, you know what? We need to look at how this works in the western states because we're different.
And so one thing I forgot to mention, if you guys have any questions as we're going through this, please ask, because, we kind of want to leave this discussion open so you guys can be able to provide your inputs and just add whatever thoughts you have. And so we put this up here just to kind of show the differences. Now, a lot of times people will put these differences up here and say this is the reason it won't work. That's not what we're saying with this. What we're saying is we do have to look at some of the differences we have. And that's just part of it, because whereas we have... That door, does that door lock? I thought I heard something. Anyway, sorry. Did it? Okay. Anyway, sorry about that. We'll have to leave it open, I guess. So anyway, but then if we look in Utah, it's irrigation, sprinkler, and flood fed. We have a lot of flood that feeds our corn as well as a lot of pivot. And so we see a lot of that throughout our state. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
What I mentioned there is that, if you look at May, that's probably when most of us are going to be trying to interseed into your corn. Back in those eastern states, you're looking at 4+ inches of rain, 4 to 6 inches of rain in May time, and some of us may not even have our water turned on yet here in Utah. And we have a natural precip of about 1.5 to 2 inches of rain, and so think of trying to establish those crops and get them growing in that cornfield. That moisture is kind of critical to us.
So to get started, what we did is we set up some plots. And so all of our plots, I'm just going to let you know from the start, are on producer-owned fields. And so we were just cooperating with producers in all these counties. And so we actually we had, multiple plots in some of these counties. And really, we just worked with cooperators in those areas trying to be able to set up these plots. Now, if you look overall at our plots, this is one important diagram we wanted to show you, just so we could show you what we did. But if you look, and I don't know, it does work. So anyway, in our fields, what we had is we actually were setting up 24 plots in each field so we could be able to rep. And what we had is basically, you can see here, I kind of have it mapped with this, but right here, this is our control plot. So in our control plot, we did not interseed anything. We just left it blank, no interseeding at all. Now, if you look up at this next one, what that V6 means, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but that is the stage at which we interseeded. So once our corn hit V6, we interseeded into that plot. And so as you can see with our plots, the reason we put this up here is we wanted to show you that each of those plots is where we were taking samples. So each field we're getting 24 samples to be able to try and get as many numbers as we can to be able to see what data comes from those different plots.
So, if you look back at that previous slide that we had right there, and you think of how we had, a control plot where we didn't put anything in, we were looking at V2, V4, V6, V8, V10, you can imagine going out there and, taking that big seed that you got in the trade show in there and putting it through that little plot and then at different times of the growing season to interseed in that, and that wasn't going to work in these plots. And so what we ended up doing, if you want Jacob to answer that, we bought a little research drill that we were able to go in between those rows. It has a drop seeder, and it's up here. You can come up afterwards and take a look at it. But we calibrated it to drop about 18 pounds per acre in those plots. And then we would run it down through the different rows, and then you could go, okay, today we were going to be seeding our V2 stage, and we go to each one of those plots in each one of those different counties and seed those at that time frame. And so we had to have something that was portable, something that we could, make sure we were putting down at 18 pounds. That little unit has a double disc opener with it, has a shoe behind it, and has a press wheel. So fairly, nice little unit there to be doing research plots with. There, Jake, do you want to play it? See if it will. We're going to play a little video here real quick. We've had to jump out and pull the videos in because they wouldn't play from our slides. So hopefully it plays here. Maybe. Any questions at this point while we're kind of waiting? We did, yeah. Push it in by hand and that. And we'll show you here in a minute where we actually lifted it up, when you get up to that V10 corn and you're trying to see those plots that, you're putting it up above your head and walking through the plots. So, had to be portable. Is it working, Jake? Silage corn, yeah. Most of what you're seeing is guys are wanting to put in silage corn because they're going to be taking it off in that September time frame, and then that's going to allow that cover crop to come back and grow. And then you can come in and throw livestock. A lot of people are throwing livestock on it and feeding out on that. We did have a couple of my growers up in Box Elder County actually do have some they're putting in on grain corn, but mainly what they've done there is waited till the grain corn was off, and then they've come in and seeded it after the grain corn was off. And it's not as long of a growing season for it. You just don't get the growth out of it like they need to. Did you know that? So on that silage corn, you're probably 108, 113, 115 day varieties. Yours, going to be about what you guys had up in cash? Yeah, probably in that 110, 115 range. Not going to work? Okay, we'll just go. In addition, so what we did was all those inputs, so nitrogen, insecticides, all that type, herbicides, all that type of stuff was what the grower cooperator that we were working with, he would do those inputs. And up in my county, they're putting on probably upwards of 200 units, 250 units of N. Yeah, and we'll show you the mix here in just a second, what we've got. That's our next slide. So great segue into this. So the mix and this is what the Conservation District had asked the seed dealer to mix for them. And you can see on that they've got, you see we've got hairy vetch and red clover, which were the legumes that they were trying to get to fix the nitrogen for it. They also had 3 different types of brassica, the daikon radish, the turnips, and the kale in there. And then you see there's some grasses, there's some broadleaf and that. So what they're trying to do is a nice mix that you could put out there, and Jake's passing out kind of that mix. The other things I want to point out right here is the fact that, and you can see it in the bag, and you can see it on the slide right here, is that you've got different size seeds. And so when it's in a mix like that, if you're trying to plant for the small seeded stuff, you're putting it in at, maybe 1/8 of an inch, whereas some of the bigger stuff should be down 1/2 inch or deeper, could be deeper than that. If you seed too deep, now all of a sudden those small seeds are not going to germinate and grow for you. And so it's one of those things that I think, I think it needs to be even simpler than that. I think sometimes you may want to just look at it and say, okay, I'm going to put 2, maybe 3, maybe 4 things in there and try and keep that not as many seeds in there.
So you use the same mix on all the plots?
We did, yep. Same mix across all the plots. Good question.
Well, go ahead. No.
18 pounds per acre calibrated, because that's what the Conservation District was seeding at, was that 18 pounds per acre, and so that's what we were doing.
And if we're being honest with you as we go down through this, and I'll just tell you, I mean, this wasn't research based. This is just what we saw as we were going through. The radish and the turnip and even the kale came out pretty good. Like, there was quite a bit of that. However, if you look at our ryegrasses, so I don't know what happened here, but we actually had some Italian ryegrass in there, and for some reason it's not showing up on this, and it should be. But it was interesting because the Italian ryegrass, we didn't see any when the corn was growing, but when they took off the corn, we have one plot specifically where when it hit that colder temperature, that ryegrass just came out of nowhere and just really boosted and came flying. Remind me, I don't think we saw much yellow mustard. We didn't see much mustard coming out in that.
Some of that stuff like the flax, we didn't see flax, we didn't see a lot of the red clover.
We did see some hairy vetch a little bit.
Some of the grass we saw, yellow mustard, buckwheat,
Yep.
a little bit of buckwheat depending on where it was at, but yeah.
So
I think that based on that, I would probably take this list and really eliminate some of those other things and try and look at the ones that really did well for us.
any questions on that? Okay, so just going over kind of the different growth stages, kind of what we talked about earlier. One of the biggest things, so when we're talking the V stages, what it means is it's basically the corn and it's how many leaf collars are exposed. And so as the corn exposes, and you can kind of see in this little picture we have up on the PowerPoint here, but you can see there's probably 1, 2, 3, you might even be getting close to 4 there. So that's going to probably be a V3 or V4 stage. And one of the things that was hard for us is you can go through a field, and the funny thing is you can be in V3, V4, and you can also have V2 all at the same time. So sometimes it can be kind of hard to be able to plot that exactly on those stages. I know we actually had one field where we had a V2, and then we also had a V6 in the same field. And it was just because the corn was a little bit variable. And it really was because it was pretty dry on that. So anything else to add to that, Mike? So again, we had this video, and I'll try this video. I don't know if it's going to work here. Let me see if I can bring it up. It's just kind of showing what we were seeing with the cover crop itself. Let's see. Looks like it's not going to work. Funny thing is it worked right before we did this. Anyway, that's how it goes, technology. So, and it can be a little bit hard to see on this, but if you look kind of close here, you can kind of see what we were starting to see. So a lot of this was planted at V4 or V2. I think this one on here was planted at V2. This one was planted at V4. And you can see we were getting that cover crop up, and it was starting to look good. And really, it was starting to kind of come about and be able to start sprouting, germinating. Now, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but some of the precip problems we had last year with the drought kind of caused problems with us too when we were talking about V stages and whatnot, so.
Throw it over to the, no, I mean, go to your slide, because you're just showing it. So, yeah, so the whole idea of our research was that we wanted to try and mimic what was being done back east. And if you looked at what their research was telling us, they were telling us that we need to be putting that cover crop in at somewhere between that V4 and V6 range. If you go earlier than that, you guys have probably seen how weeds will ding your corn yields. And so that's why we put in that V2 stage, because hopefully we should have seen that, how the cover crop would suppress our corn yields. We went later than that so that we could see, okay, does the cover crop establish? And that's why we had those in there. That's how those affected the yields. One second, I'll get to you. The other thing is we want to see, hopefully over time, we're going to see that it's going to improve our soil health of our soils. And then the last thing is, we want to be here, we want to be able to share those results with growers. Yes, comment, question. So most of those guys had Roundup Ready corn. There's one of the growers out in Millard County that his was organic. He had organic dairy, and so he couldn't do that. But most of it is Roundup Ready corn. And so that was another problem, because even though we were doing Roundup, most of my growers are putting Roundup along with something else that gives you a residual. So, okay, when, I need to spray after they've, or plant after they've sprayed, but yet before the weeds get, and so it's a tricky situation. And we'll show a little bit later, one of the slides here, I'll show you where basically I asked my grower that was just spraying, to just spray the plot with Roundup and did not put any of the residual herbicides in there, and I'll show you a picture of what happened to us, so. Go back.
What kind of preparation did you use to get that seedbed started with that corn crop?
So on the left or on the right? Sorry. On the left. So basically that was a field that was worked, just conventionally worked with it, and then he left it like that. And this is the one down in Weber County. And so if you'll notice, the center there is an untilled strip. An unfurrowed strip. On the right and on the left of it there, you see that he actually was furrowing. And so he was trying to do some water conservation by when he irrigated, he'd just put the water on the opposite sides of it right there and plant out in it. Now, that kind of gets us, and we'll show you here in a second what happens if you got to run, some furrows down through there. Where do you put your seed bed, and when do you put it in there?
Well, and so technically they weren't organic, so it was a dairy, and what they were is they weren't allowed to have any GMOs because they were with Dannon, and it was only one. We only had one. And I will be quite honest with you, their herbicide program is they use something that has really a long-lasting residual, so that when they couldn't use that, the weeds just outgrew everything. And we really didn't have any cover crop growth there. So you won't see, that was our Millard plot, and you won't see that in our data because that one kind of took a wash. We just couldn't keep the weeds away, and it got too bad. And so that's something that I think we really learned from this, and we'll talk a little bit more about it later. But the herbicide, trying to figure out matching that with cover crop. I know there is some research coming out of Penn State, though, where they're talking about doing it with organic corn growers. And so I think they're starting to look into some ways that they can be able to do that a little bit better. So, so we've been talking about these issues. You guys are great because you're already on to the next slide talking about these issues. So one of the first things we wanted to bring up is last year's drought and the precip. So I have the averages up there, and a lot of times we talk about how our summer months are hard because we really don't get the precip in June, July, and August. We really are kind of lacking in those months, and that's when it can be hard with these cover crops sometimes to get them up and going. Now last year, if you guys remember, earlier in the spring, especially if you look at May there, we had hardly any precip. We really didn't. Now this is Cache County specific, but that was across the state. So what we noticed as we were going in, and as we were going in at all these different timings, so we're going in at V2, right? And so V2 is probably around the 1st of June, kind of to the 4th. V4 was probably about June 7th through the 14th area. The hard part that we were having is during that time, basically we weren't seeing any germination until water flowed on it, because there was nothing coming up. Now on a regular year, it probably would be a little bit different because we'd get those May showers. But with this year, really, honestly, a lot of times we'd plant V2, V4 before they'd even water. And so those two would come up together and be germinated together. Now, again, that's going to be a year issue, but that's one of the things that we really ran into is it was hard to be able to tell those different things apart as I dropped that, just due to the fact that really it was germinating as soon as it would get water. We also, I should mention, had some seed kill, because some of the seeds would start germinating, but then they wouldn't get water quick enough because a turn was too far out. And so we did see some of that as we were going through. This is the Miller County.
Yeah, and so let's talk herbicides. One of the things that they'll tell you in some of the research is that, if you're going into corn, into interseeding, thinking you're going to clean up your field, it's not going to happen. Because a lot of times you've got weeds already in there, and you can't put down a spray that's going to control the weeds, because that same spray is going to take out your cover crop. One of the research ideas that they said, for example, if you've got a grass problem, put a cover crop in that's broadleaf, and then you can go and use a grass herbicide along with your Roundup to, if you put a Roundup treatment on earlier, then you can use a broadleaf spray later on. If you've got a broadleaf problem, put some grasses in there and then use spray that'll take out your broadleaves. That's a good idea. And as Jake mentioned here, this right here is, the Miller County plots, and you can see there's a lot of red root pigweed and stuff in there. And one of the growers that I worked with, like I said, I asked him to take those herbicides out other than just the Roundup, and that field just got really overgrown. I went in and hand weeded it as well to try and keep the weeds out, and still missed it. And I'll show those pictures here in just a second. But yeah, it's a problem with those. Cultivation. Sure. Put us to the next one. Yeah. So this is one of our fields down in Weber County, and you can kind of see that this is probably the V2 stage that we were looking at going in and interseeding those plots. And again, if you're going to be putting that in that V2 stage, but yet you're going to have to cultivate that field, you're going to be throwing a lot of dirt back up on those small plants. So then it's like, okay, it's a timing issue. Go to the next one. So you kind of see here we've seeded. You've got the little cover crop coming up. If he comes in and does the cultivation on it, now you've thrown that up. If you do cultivation and then you're going to seed into that, where are you going to put the seed? You're going to put the seed in the center of the furrow. You're going to put the seeds on the side so it's closer to the corn rows. If you do furrow irrigate, all of a sudden as it gets later on in the year and you get some of that cover crop up, how is that going to impede the flow of water down through the field? One of my growers, he didn't cultivate through it and left it like that, and so we had some of that water that, flat across the field, and it's just going to go wherever the path of least resistance is at. Okay?
And also, I wanted to mention, so in some of our plots, specifically in our severe plots, they had actually come in already and furrowed, and so we were taking this thing over here and we were off-roading, going on an angle, trying to get that seed in, because really, that's the hard part. And I'll tell you the truth, with the interseeder up in Cache, that's one thing, it has worked in furrow, but it is one thing we're looking at to see how we can improve that, because it's a little bit more difficult to get that seed planted, especially if you're going to do furrow on it.
So do you think you should furrow first or furrow after? If you're putting it into that V4, V6 stage, you're going to be probably furrowing before and then drilling.
Now,
And with the big interseeders that you can see in there, that's not going to be a problem to get in there. But the thing is, the question is going to be, Mark, is where are you going to place that seed? Are you going to put it, on the edges of the furrow so you've got more of a water channel go down through, or are you just going to put one row and put it down through? Where do you put it?
So was all your plots flood, or was that?
No, we had a mix. We had flood and pivot. So
That make a big difference then?
it was interesting. The biggest difference we saw is actually with the flood. And with the flood irrigation, we actually saw germination earlier than we did on the pivots. And I think it's because there's more water going right into the soil, kind of giving that, boost of water to germinate. That's what we saw at first, and then kind of later on we saw that, the pivots kind of came through and were consistent enough. One of the things I was also going to say is they are trying to develop interseeders as well that actually come through and furrow, and they interseed as they're furrowing. And so that's something that they're working on, because it's like, well, you make one pass, and while you're getting your furrow set up, you can really interseed that cover crop. Now, one of the things we wanted to say, so this is the picture Mike was talking about. That's on V10. I did not love that part of the project, so anyway, but I'll tell you the honest truth. The hard part is if you look at kind of the dates. So this is one field and the dates we were interseeding at. And you can see once that heat turns on, those stages go fast. And so if you can imagine, this is one field we had. So of our 8 fields during this time, we were running ragged because we were trying to hit all the fields. And you got to drive down to Sevier or go down to Millard. Luckily, those were covered by our extension agents down there. But you can see, really, we had 5 days between these two. And that's when the heat of the summer was hitting. And that is one thing that I think you need to realize, and this is true. Cache County has noticed this with their interseeder. So all the Eastern research has shown us that V4 to V6 is the right time to be able to go in and interseed. Now, the interseeder in Cache County, I'll tell you, when corn's from V4 to V6, that thing is never stopped. That thing is running constantly. And I'll tell you, it's not a problem of having the interseeder. It's a problem of getting through the acreage that you need to. Because honestly, you don't have time, and time's going to kill you. That's what's going to be the killer there. And so I don't know how many of you heard, and Tony may have announced this, but now we actually have an interseeder. So we got one in Cache, but we got one in Box Elder as well as Sevier now. And so there are some more interseeders. But again, you have that short window where you're trying to hit it. And it can be really difficult because that short window can, if you get the heat coming on, that short window can diminish even from there. And so, anyway, it's just something to think about as you're looking to interseed.
Basically, you figure about 1,000 acres in that time frame, about a week, you can interseed. So, if you've got 3 or 4 growers that want to put in a couple of 100 acres, there was that one interseed that being used for that time frame.
Yeah, in Cache County, the way the Conservation District has done it up there, and if any of them aren't on virtual, they can comment because they're the ones who run this more than me. But the thing is they have to have that scheduled beforehand. And you got to imagine the interseeder, the first day you're using it, you're calibrating it, and you're trying to get all the kinks out and whatnot. So really, it's a very stressful time because you're really just moving it and making it go as you can. One of the things that they tried to do, and this is just, again, coming from the Conservation District, is they try and have one tractor on it so that you're not switching to different
2 rows, and we would harvest the middle 2 rows, 10 feet of those that we would chop out. At that point in time, we'd also look at our population counts and be able to know. Most growers, if you're doing silage corn, you're probably in that 35,000 plant range, maybe a little bit higher, 37, 38. With those, and so we count those populations, and then what we would do is we would weigh that corn. We had a little weigh wagon that we would pull down through the corn plots and weigh it, and then we would select 3 of those corn stalks randomly in there that we would pack out, and we would chip it and grind it. And so we just had a little chipper shredder that we would blow those, chop the whole plant, throw it through it, and then over here in this container, we would mix it up, pull a grab sample off that we would then dry, that we would then send to the lab for our analysis, because we want to not only see the yields, but we want to see the nutritional quality of the corn, of the different plots that we were doing. Okay. And ideally, what you'd like to see is once after you've harvested the corn, if you look, this is a nice picture here. You can see the grasses. You can see some of the brassicas and that in there. And that's ideally what you like to see fairly quickly after you've harvested is that green cover coming back in. Go next slide, Jake. And this is one of the plots. This is not one of the commercial plot, or plots that we harvested over in Cache County. This was one of the growers that we just knew was growing it. And so if you look, this is out on the headland there, and you can kind of see in this picture that, that cover crop before he harvested was up probably 2+ feet in that area. And, if you're harvesting it for silage, you can see you're taking out a major portion of that, and it's going to the pit that you're going to be packing in there. And you've also left quite a bit here in the ground that, is going to grow and going to provide that livestock feed or the nourishment for later on in the year. You till back in. Okay, next one. So ideally, we did on this one right here, and Jake, you went in and actually at the pit and pulled samples there off of that to do a nutritional analysis off of it. Do you want to say anything else about that?
Well, I'll just mention, so we kind of compared that, and really there wasn't a lot of difference overall with the silage. And if you're thinking about silage, I mean, the one thing you got to remember is we're looking at bulk. We're nutrition-wise, we're not going to be looking at too many nutrition parameters. We're going to be looking for the bulk. And so that's one of the big things. So as he's going in, and actually I was able to talk to the guy that was harvesting this, and he said occasionally he'd get a little gummed up, but he got it at the right RPM, and it started moving pretty well. But that's one of the things he said is he's like, man, at first I was coming in this and it was gumming up the chopper a little bit because, of that thick.
Done a lot of the, Nebraska, the turnip tops and kale and that, they can be quite wet vegetated going in there, that corn. It
Yeah.
wouldn't take much to
Make it chop. Yeah.
When did you harvest?
So this was the week after State Fair. So it would have been about September 20th, around there is where it was. So when I was out there on that. So, and I think with kind of going to this next picture, so this is one thing we wanted to show. So you can see on this picture that's on the left here, you can see how good that growth is. Now, one of the things I want you to notice with that growth, though, is you're missing your corn row, And so really, this is an area that got extra sunlight. It's an area that really the cover crop was allowed to grow because it had the extra sun. Now, if you look at this other picture, you can kind of see the difference where that's more spindly. Now, when you look at the research, that's the kind of stuff you're actually looking for because the cover crop eventually is actually supposed to go dormant because it's supposed to be able to be germinated but waiting to go as soon as you harvest that corn. And so you can see there wasn't much here. And actually, I would say I think that we do wish there was a little bit more here, a little bit better of a stand. And that's one of the issues we saw when we were doing our research plots is some of our plots only had this little bit, and so it wasn't even enough that we could measure the cover crop yield overall, if that makes sense. And so some of the things we've thought about is probably maybe trying to go in 20 days later, 30 days later to take the yield then to see what kind of growth you got after. But that's kind of the things we were looking at as we were getting ready to kind of come in and start harvesting. That might be a little bit before harvest, though. That might be.
That was because it had totally closed. And so
Yeah.
our original thought was when it comes time to harvest,
Our original thought was when we were going to harvest it was that we were going to come in and harvest the corn and weigh it, and then we're also going to harvest the cover crop mass and weigh it. Look at it, and really when it came time to harvesting, that's earlier on in the year, and when we went to harvest, there was just really not a lot there to harvest, to pull out. And so we kind of abandoned that, once you got into it, say, okay, this is what it is. No, because most of them, there wasn't enough to pop back up after that time period to look at. And we'll show you some pictures here in just a second to show you some of those other commercially seeded fields and what they look like. And some of those had some really good looking deals.
I went back to the couple that I had in Roxbury County and looked at it, and it
Yeah.
would have been a failure.
Well, and the other problem is growers have different goals after, because there's some guys who are coming in and grazing it, so you can go look at it, but there's other guys who are getting ready to till it in pretty quick after. So it just not every grower has the same goal. You had a question? Well, yeah, that's a good question.
That's where he's saying he had, that extra moisture was in those leaves and stuff, really was, he just have a hard time getting that to feed through the chopper like we needed to.
Yeah, and that is a very good point. And I actually, on the moisture content, I can't remember what it was at. I didn't think it was alarmingly bad, so because I didn't notice it off the top of my head. So I think it was still in the range, but that is a good point.
Adjust that, you know, a little later because you've got to compensate that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's a lot of that.
Yeah, with that moisture. So there's a little bit of a mixture. Some of the cool season will actually, I mean, they'll get affected by the freeze, and there's been some people who've noticed a little bit on the next year, but really overall they've noticed most of this winter kills, and so it's gone. The cool season will last quite a bit longer. The grower this field, he grazed until late November. Now, we did have a pretty warm fall overall, but he grazed into November pretty well. And so, I mean, he was still seeing a little bit of growth there as well. But yeah, so like, I think what species? I mean, your radishes and your turnips, they do pretty decently over even when it freezes, So after that, we prepared the samples. So what we did here is we took those samples, threw them through the chipper like we showed you earlier, and then we actually had to grind them down to 1 millimeter. And then what we did is we run the samples to be able to get the nutrition quality. Now again, I'm just going to say with that, I know nutrition quality, that's something you're not looking at because it's not going to make a difference on the overall price. But it's something we just wanted to take a look at and see if we found any differences overall and kind of the differences there. So kind of going into our yield. So the yields we're going to show you right here, this is all the corn yields, tons per acre. So one of the big things, you notice some differences here, but one of the big things I want to point out is all of these are really pretty similar overall, I would say. They're not too different, and honestly, when we ran them through statistics, there was no significant difference overall. So really, we did not see any difference in any of the interseeding stages. Now again, we had some issues, so we want to make that clear that the cover crop could have probably been a little bit better, so we might have seen a lot more effects later on if the cover crop was better. But again, we really did not see yield differences, and that's going to be true across the board. This is our severe field. I mean, we did not see any outstanding differences. Now, this one looks like there's an outstanding difference, but again, it wasn't anything significant that would be kind of put out of our range. Is there anything you want to say with that, Mike?
No, yeah.
Keep going.
So what's your timing? Did you harvest it right when you took the corn off then? Or is that
Yeah,
when
so we were in there right before, in fact, some of them we were having to hurry up and get it done.
Before the chopper's coming in. Yeah. Yeah. And that
Normal chopper run, like it was September 22nd.
Yeah.
you didn't come back later to see if there was any more regrowth after?
Yeah, we'll show you some pictures on that. And so we were going through with a machete cutting 10-foot sections, and I mean, this is the weight right after we cut them, so that's just right when we were going through the fields. And so really, I'm showing you all these pictures. Now, I will tell you, in one of our cache plots, we actually only were able to get 2, so we were able to do the control and the V6 planting. But again, we're seeing the same thing where we really didn't see a difference in yield overall. And so, I mean, if you're looking at that and thinking from, a view of when to interseed, you're like, well, I can interseed at any time. But I will tell you, as we did this project, one of the biggest things that we learned from it is that management-wise, there are times that are going to be much better than others. For example, in a lot of our V2 plots, we just had weeds everywhere. And I really think that's because if you can wait and hit after you get your Roundup spray on and kind of put your cover crop in there, you're going to have a lot more success with having your weeds kind of take a step back and whatnot. So, do you want me to keep going, Mike, or you got anything to say? Okay, so now one of the things we did see some differences in the nutritional quality, but overall I just want to say these were only in a couple fields did we see this, so it wasn't a trend across the board, but we did want to show you what we saw. So for ADF, you're going to want a lower number, right, because you want the digestibility to be better. So you can see our control plot in the Cache County plot here. Our control plot actually had lower ADF than our V6 stage. And it's interesting because if you look at our severe west plot, you'll see that our control plot again had a lower rate as well as the V4. So those two, for some reason, had a lower rate. And the funny part is as we go through this with NDF as well, we saw the same thing. NDF was very similar, which again, lower is better. You have more digestible nutrients available. And again, last but not least, TDN, which uses, ADF and NDF in its calculation, you're going to see the same thing. So it was interesting because TDN is going to be, basically, it's going to be flipped here. So in your control, you're going to have a better TDN overall, and at your control in V4 stages. Now again, this is only 2 fields that we saw this in, and so it's one of those things where it's like, well, it was interesting that we got that, but it wasn't across the board. So an average across all of them? I do. I don't have it on this PowerPoint, but I do have an average over the entire thing. Not, and it was hard because what we basically, when we were looking at our numbers and whatnot, it was hard because we couldn't compare field. We couldn't go compare across all fields, if that makes sense, because the fields were so different and variable. So we kind of had to do it field by field. But again, we didn't see. These are all the trends I'm showing you that we really stuck out between the different fields and different things. So.
So just kind of want to show you, this field right here is what it looked like after harvest. And so you can go back out there. One of the critical things is going to be is that, if you're looking at grazing it or you're wanting to just get some more green growth out there for later on for fall time of the year, so that you've got, those microorganisms are going to be breaking that down in your soils and that, you're probably going to want to come in and put some water on it. This particular grower right here, within 2 days of harvest, went in and just ran a sprinkler, his pivot across it, and just give it a squirt of water to help those cover crops come back, and looks really, really good right there. Next slide. One of the other things you're going to see is that, this is what it would have looked like clear through, but you're going to have places where you're driving your equipment through there and you're going to be mashing some of that stuff down. Typically, it doesn't come back very well in those areas. Next slide. And just a close-up, you can kind of see there's a lot of vegetation in there. Here's where you got the tire tracks have really, mashed a lot of that and killed a lot of it. This is that field again, and you can see how much is green, and there's a good biodiversity in that field right there.
So that's the same plot that was harvested a week after the state fair, so about September 20th. This picture was taken on October 8th, just to give you a kind of time frame.
And he went out, let back later in, put some dairy heifers in there, didn't he, or beef cattle in there. And what did he say, like, how many weeks was he able to run, how many he had? Yeah, on there. This is another field just up the road from the last slide, and you can see a lot of what little bit they've got left in there. It would have really helped if they would have given that a squirt of water to really brought that back. That field never really responded after they had removed that corn like it should have, and just did, I guess it just depends on what you're going to try and do with it. To me, I would have said, okay, you had a nice cover crop in there, and then you did nothing to take care of it afterwards. Was it worth it for you to do all that type of stuff? No. I don't think I did. I don't think they did.
Yeah, the cool weather also helps the cover crop. When the cool weather sets in, that's another thing. But again, getting that water on it was key. But
that we noticed there. What was cool too is you go out there and you look at, some of those fields, you can see, a lot of times you're putting in those turnips and those radishes to take up the phosphorus, potassium, things like that, and then they would release that as they decomposed. You can kind of see, that's one of the daikon radishes over there on the right with the glove next to it. Amazing how big those things could get and how deep, and that's supposed to also help break up that compaction layer. And you've got a good diversity in there with those plants. And one of the other things here.
sorry, I saw a question.
Well, we don't have any signs for fall rainwater. If you put in some of these varieties, you don't have any data at all, you can put a cover crop in there, but the canopy's over and we're harvesting October, November, and have any success with coming out of dormancy and then coming
That's a good question.
So one of the fields that I had, he was actually going to do grain corn. No, he was going to do silage corn with it, and then he decided that he wanted to take it out as grain corn. And that field, we had an okay cover crop through the growing season, but by the time he took it out as corn, it was just so late in the year that he didn't see a lot of regrowth on it at all. It wasn't totally not there, but there wasn't, like those silage fields, it wasn't anything like that. And I think what it's going to be is, if that's your goal, there's probably some of these seeds that we're looking at, some of the plants that we're looking at that you need to focus on, that would be that layer type that would probably work better for you, and something you won't leave out of the mix, definitely. Yeah, and we've had some guys that have experimented with grain corn, actually, waiting until after they've harvested the grain corn. I mean, obviously, up in my county, we're putting a lot of wheat in after grain corn as well. This last year, corn was fairly late coming off and that up in some of those areas, and so they just did not, they didn't get the grain corn in, and we didn't have any moisture to bring it up. And so you got a lot of those grain corn fields that are planted to winter wheat that never really germinated much on it. And so it's a gamble, and you guys have farmed long enough that you know that every year's a little bit different. This is what we saw this year. We could have an earlier fall and get some of the growth out of it with some of these other types. So we're just trying to see what we got. This is what we saw this year. That's about.
So the cost per acre for seed alone. So last year when they did it, I know it was about 30. If I remember right, it was a little bit better this year. I think it was around 25 per acre about. So it has varied a little bit depending, because they have been adjusting this seed mix for quite a while. So it has varied a little over time. And that 25 number might be wrong. It might even be better than that now. But that's kind of where we've been seeing it at so far. Yeah.
Done over the last few years some trials in grain corn, and I'll first off tell you right now, like, if you're planting past that V10 or doing any type of broadcast seeding, whether it be aerial, it was a hard failure. That ground's crusted. The seed to soil contact's horrible, and you're not getting the moisture to it. We had a producer last year. He went and bought a 20-foot Great Plains grain drill, 3-point hitch, and then he took out the sections where the rows were, and he's on a sub-inch accuracy, and he went to strip till the same. So he planted, and he tried different timelines, and it lined up exactly with what you said right there. The one that he put in between V4 and V6, he had tremendous success. Now, it was a really hard water year there last year, and he had to cut his irrigation on his other fields, and so that was kind of the field that he put the water to. So the cover crop is going to take water. Now, he had oats, turnips, radish. We also had crimson clover, which has kind of been a struggle out here some with our higher pHs, but it actually came. We did Alsite clover, which did really, really well. And I'm just trying to think off the top of my head of other species, but we'll be working with Matt next year, because we're doing this over the next few years. And he had, on that one pivot where he did it timing right and put the seed in the ground, we had great success. We have a lot of pictures of those. But when he went and harvested it, it was below the header of the corn, of the combine. And he was able to put 600 head on 125 acres at $1.50 a day for a month and a half. That's because he also implemented grazing management. They put the wire on the pivot, and they gave them just a specific area, kind of intensive grazing on it. And when I do those numbers in my head, that's almost around $40,000 for $1.50 a day, 600 head for 45 days. The cover crop was anywhere from $25 to $35 an acre. He did different rates. I'm not painting the picture, it's all money, because you gotta realize, like, there are cause and effects to everything you do. Being a tight water year, it hurt. So we did have some of the other fields that hurt, but he was able to make that economically pay for himself because he implemented a lot of those those managements. And so his oats were still green, and we got pictures like they were still green clear till November, still growing. But, you know, as those growing gray unit and days decrease, the amount of growth is less. But yes, the question of what, going directly where you said, like when it started to freeze and the canopy opened it up is when for us, it started growing back fairly well. So, and we missed our opportunity this past year to get USU involved with it, just with the drought and everything. We just couldn't get our days lined up. But Matt Yost is lined up that over the next few years we're going to be doing studies on this. Again, I will say it wasn't all a home run. He had one field that was a home run. We had some losses. I mean, we had some really tough soil, good soils, and one field that they took on that had some herbicide residual. And yeah. Yeah, so there's a lot of complexity with it, but we've seen a lot of promise, and believe it or not, we've seen a lot of failure.
The hard failure to keep the broadcasting, I mean, is there any day-to-day? I'm thinking timeliness to get over a lot of acres of corn with an interseeder.
Yep.
Between spraying and the last irrigation, I got a window line, or
Typically, what you're gonna see with broadcasting that, you're gonna have to increase those seeding rates up. Yeah, because you know.
and water, water's not an issue, we usually have plenty of water there, so that's.
Yeah, the thing with broadcasting is you gotta get some seed soil contact to get that to grow, and so usually you're putting it on at a heavier rate. Anybody else done anything with broadcasting? I've had a few guys do, what's your, oh, in the ground, yeah. Yeah, I think I had to try and do it. I think I would try and get a drill in there and do drilling.
Well, and I'll just mention, and he's actually down here, Joe Can, he's down here, I think, presenting. You might want to hit him up because he actually has a seeder that he's adapted. It's not broadcast, but what it does is it's an air seeder, and he actually likes it because he does. He says he can get it right in where he needs it, and he really likes that system. And I think you bring up a great point, and that's what I wanted to hit off. We're running kind of low on time here. So the kind of one of the last points I wanted to hit is we're actually going to change this study this year. So we went in with the idea, as researchers, we come in with the idea a lot of times like, well, we're going to figure out V2, V4, V6, V8, V10. And as you can see over this year, it was kind of a tricky thing, especially because we didn't have the precip we usually do. And like you said, we kind of were learning as we go. Some of the biggest things that we found, and Mike, you can correct me if you think I'm wrong on this, but some of the biggest things we found as we were going through this year is just going by production practices for you as growers. Really, there's a time that fits where the cover crop grows best. And overall, that is the V4 to V6 window. Because if you're coming in at V2, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of times that's before you're even going to be spraying Roundup or, putting your herbicide plan on. And so what we saw then is you had weeds coming up. V4, V6 is actually ideal because we usually had irrigation turns. And again, that's going to change year to year, but there were irrigation turns during that timeline. And really, that time has been ideal. Now, if you go later than that, I'll tell you that corn gets so tall, even those interseeders, they can't get unless you're doing an aerial or something else. The interseeders are even, you can look at the height on that interseeder that we had, but it would have been too short to go through there even. And so really that window has become the prime time, and I think just management-wise it is that right time, but from all the other research that we've seen, it's also the prime time for those cover crops to grow.
Yeah, because you're really trying to get that in before that corn canopy closes it up and it's not getting the sunlight to grow. And it just sits there and sits dormant. Yeah. We did. No.
So the study itself didn't, but the Conservation District in North Cache, actually, they wanted to do this. So we did take soil samples, and those soil samples are going to be run year to year. The problem is that's a long process, just because it's going to be, a 5-year process. But we do have data that's being collected. The soil samples have been run, but this year was a baseline. Next year is going to be the first year, so this is going to be a long time period. That's only in Cache, though, so far, is where we've got it right now.
So this is just that slide that I alluded to about the weeds. So the top picture right here, you see that's where they've done the commercial, glyphosate and whatever other combination of weeds that or herbicides that they've needed. You can see right here the line. This is our plots right here. This is what the plots look like. That was with Roundup. I actually went out there and hand weeded through those plots, and then kind of forgot about them and left them out. I think, okay, I got the weeds controlled. And then I went out there come harvest time, and it's like, oh my gosh, this guy's going to hate me. And so I think those weeds, I go back to it and say, don't think you're going to put in cover crops and control your weeds out there, because you're not. So make sure you got a good clean field to start with.
Okay, last thing, and then we're going to finish up. So I mentioned plans for next year. So this next year, we're actually going to switch gears, and what we're going to do is we're going to actually use the interseeders. So like we mentioned with this timing idea, we really couldn't use the interseeders, or else we'd be tearing out the whole field as we're trying to turn around and do these plots. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to use the commercial interseeders that are available in these different counties, and what we're going to try and do is we're actually going to plant probably ideally V4 to V6. We're just going to keep it all at the same timing rate. But we're actually going to do a study where we see on the population of the corn. So we're going to kind of try and do a little bit of lower rates compared to regular rates to see if that increases the cover crop in those areas, and look at the cover crop yield from there. We just feel from this, what we have learned from this study, really, we know that V4 to V6 is kind of that ideal timeline, and kind of seeing that density. And hopefully, we were going to work with you this year, and it just didn't work out, so I'm hoping that this next year we'll be in the basin with you. So anyway, with that, do you have something else to say?
One other thing I was just going to mention was where we found our better cover crop establishment and growth was in lower plant populations. We were about 23.5, wasn't that about where we saw that at the one field? 24.5 is where we saw those. And so you're going like, okay, that's, yeah, I see your eyes right there. That's really down. Most guys are probably at 35, 37. And so the idea you've got to look at and say is, am I going for corn? Am I going for cover crops? Where is that balance at? Where's the key? Well, the thing with it is when we went down lower like that, then you had a lot of that cover crop, then that the weight of the cover crop boosted it up. But I still think you're going to be less than, can I make that yeah, we're going to be less than your normal yields with going at those lower rates. But it's one of the things we got to look at. And we have first year data, and hopefully we got 2 or 3 more years that we can really fine tune it a lot more. So. And that's what the research is said back east in that, is that, yeah, you got to be at those lower populations. I don't know if there's any grower that really wants to go with those lower populations. Okay? Any final questions? About time, right? So.
If you have questions.
Yeah, we're going to be around here. Come grab us. Hopefully you've enjoyed your conference so far and you've learned something from this. We've learned a lot from it, that's for sure. A lot of things not to do and to do.
Thanks, guys.